Welcome to the Female Founder Unplugged podcast, a show for women entrepreneurs who want to build, grow, and lead successful businesses and high-performing teams. I'm your host, Lindsay White, leadership coach and people strategy expert, here to bring you unplugged conversations with a variety of amazing guests who share expert advice and real actionable people strategies for your growing business. Ready to get unplugged? Let's jump in. All right. I have with me today on the podcast someone I am really excited to have a conversation with. This is going to be a powerful one, so buckle up. I have Somia Sadiq, whose ancestral roots are, really deeply grounded in post-colonial Punjab and Kashmir. Somia is a leading planner who has developed a really interesting and pioneering practice in engagement, conflict transformation, love that, and negotiating space for those whose voices are unheard or ignored. This is deeply rooted in her work of impact assessment, and Somia founded Narratives Inc., a planning firm that emphasizes, and I love this, human-centric, trauma-informed story work, lived experience, and really is about creating space for celebration of ancestral identity. It is absolutely fabulous to have you here with us. I love everything about that, and I cannot wait to get into this conversation today. Thank you so much for being
Oh,
here.
thank you. Thank you, Lindsay. It's always so humbling to hear someone say those words. So thank you.
Right?
Happy to be here. Happy to be here.
Yeah. Okay. So tell us about your journey to starting this beautiful practice and the work that you do.
Yeah, thank you. So I ended up in Canada in 2002. So I'm a newcomer here. You've already talked a little bit about my background. So in a lot of ways, my journey is very much a journey of navigating the Canadian society, the Canadian landscape as a newcomer, as a person of color, as a Muslim woman of color. And so I've learned, I've understood, I've failed, gotten up and kept going along this path. And my background my cultural roots have very deeply influenced the work that I do.
Sure.
And how I approach it. So what started as a journey in environmental sciences evolved very quickly into conflict transformation, because that's where my ancestral roots are, very much in community mediation and such. And after working in leadership positions very early in my career, I found myself feeling ready one day that it was time to start my own practice, and we're just 7 years old at Narratives.
I love it. And I thank you for sharing that. I really love this concept of conflict transformation.
Hmm.
Will you tell us a little bit about how you define that and how you came to use that particular phrasing?
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you. So the beauty of definitions is, if you ever ask someone to define something, there's 140 definitions of something, and that's great. It's beautiful in its own way, because we as humans are always learning, and I think that's a good sign that we listen to a definition and wonder, oh, there might be a little nuance here that you'd like to add. So I love exploring definitions. So I'll tell you what my understanding of conflict transformation is and what my definition of that is. So conflict resolution is two parties in conflict, and you come to an understanding, an agreement that allows you to no longer be in conflict, and that's the end. You both go your own way. So you've resolved the conflict. Conflict transformation is an approach to understanding conflict, an approach to coming together in conflict and walking away from the conflict in a manner that you feel that if you're ever in conflict again, that you can come to the table and resolve that next conflict. What is really powerful about that approach is it honors the fact that as humans, we will always be in conflict about something or the other, right? So if we can build the tools for ourselves that allow us to at least come together in a respectful way, in a meaningful way in the future, then we're much better off than just walking away and never seeing each other again. So that's conflict transformation for me.
I love that. And I mean, I asked that very much on purpose because, part of my career and even the work I do now is really helping particularly female leaders step into that space where there is conflict and find resolutions, I'll use that word,
Mhm.
that are deeply meaningful. And in fact, really create a space of where everyone walks away feeling like they've gotten something really impactful and powerful out of it. Doesn't always
Mhm.
mean we're necessarily going to agree, especially the small business owners I work with. Somebody's got to make the decision. And
Mhm.
sometimes that means other people aren't going to be happy. And that
Mhm.
is what it is. But this idea that we can actually transform the space of conflict into something that is more connected and more meaningful and more empowering for more people. I actually, that, like, to me, that's just like super exciting. That's a space where we can all feel really great and actually transform what conflict really looks and sounds and feels like.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more, Lindsay. I think there's so many things that happen when you approach conflict in that way.
Oh,
Because your goal is transformation of a relationship, you
yes.
approach it with more intentionality, you approach it with humility, you approach it with a sense of how do we ensure, like you said, more impactful. In order to create something that's more impactful, you'll put it in more horsepower into that scenario.
Yes.
So it changes, the idea of transformation takes you 20 steps back and you just approach things with a much more, like a much deeper intentional way, which I think goes a really long way. Not only are you empowered by the end of the process, you have reclaimed your agency, you've built resilience to be able to bring it back to the table when you need it. So I'm all for it.
Well, and then conflict, I mean, conflict has such a negative connotation.
Mm-hmm.
And it like it really does when we I mean I work with I mean women come to me specifically because they're not effective as a leader in their business because they cannot even entertain the thought of something conflictual. Like it is so anxiety inducing in many ways, but this space where we can make conflict transformational, it just takes all of that negative energy out of even the word conflict, because it doesn't
Yeah,
have to be mean and nasty. It doesn't have to be zero sum. There doesn't have to be a winner and a loser. So I
absolutely.
love it.
Absolutely. And the thing also is, I've been talking about this a lot recently in the context of what does it mean to build trauma-informed leadership and
Ah,
trauma-informed workplaces. And I think as society, we've framed conflict as this, don't touch it. It's
yes.
we we feel we don't have the tools, that it'll be painful, it'll be uncomfortable. And I think what that's doing is we're so afraid of the discomfort because we're worried that we don't have the skills, the tools to be able to manage
Yes.
and sit with that discomfort, that we
Yes.
completely avoid conflict.
Yes.
Humans have always been in conflict. Conflict is where we learn. Conflict is where some really interesting, cocktails of hormones and everything else flows through our body. Conflict is where we change. So I think, there's so much work to be done in reframing
Hmm.
conflict from being this like, ooh, can't touch it, to here's another opportunity to learn. Doesn't mean we go looking for trouble, to quote Mufasa in The Lion King, when he says to Simba, being brave doesn't mean you go looking for trouble.
No doubt.
We need to start embracing and reframing conflict for ourselves as an opportunity for growth and understanding and doing better in our groups and communities.
Yeah, and it's yes, and a space for real connection,
Absolutely,
right? Like
absolutely.
I think it can be a space for learning, for growth, but also to like just really truly connect with others and understand, get curious and really, lean into what do I maybe not, what am I not seeing? What do I not know?
Yeah.
What's happening
Yeah.
here? I love it.
Yeah.
So you just sort of talked about, and I think we hear this phrase a lot, trauma informed,
Mhm.
right? Describe for us, your philosophy, your sort of definition of that, and how as leaders we can embrace this idea of being more trauma informed, particularly as we lead in our small businesses.
Mhm. Great question. So with my understanding of being trauma informed is coming at leadership, coming into leadership, into any relationship,
Yeah.
any connection with this, with a reframing of what is wrong with you to what has happened to you.
Yeah,
Right? And
I
we
like
use
that.
that phrase so much. What is wrong with you? We think
Yes.
about it as soon as someone behaves in a manner that we're not expecting. We tend to immediately make so many assumptions about their
Oh, yeah.
behavior. Like, why are they doing this and so on? So if we can take a step back, have a brief moment of reframing in our minds and say, what has happened to you? Now we're approaching this person with compassion, with understanding. Now, it doesn't mean that the person that we're interacting with gets a free ride to
No.
do whatever. Absolutely not. But being intentional about that relationship, being intentional about thinking about what might have happened to a person, what kinds of traumas they might have experienced, which influences their learned behavior, their exercise behavior, allows us to approach people with a little bit more compassion. And it allows us to build systems that can be helpful for people and meet people where they're at.
Yeah.
So it really just brings about leadership that works for most people. There's never going to be a solution that meets everybody's needs.
Yeah.
But trauma-informed leadership or trauma-informed leadership is leadership that holds space for people to be their best selves, for there to be psychological safety, for there to be freedom of discourse. Doesn't mean you have the right to say everything and everything, but
Yeah.
it introduces intentionality when we try to understand, take the time to understand what trauma means and how it impacts people.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I think, when we as leaders approach conversations with deep curiosity and again a focus on connection, um, we create the space for people to feel far more comfortable. They feel trust, they feel the integrity in that. And so I really appreciate yeah, just understanding a little bit more about sort of what that approach is from your perspective. Because
Mhm.
I think we can all move in that direction, even if we know that we're very sensitive to that. I think we have to keep that at the forefront.
Yeah. And an example of that, um, when we're working with, say, communities conducting an interview on how someone is going to be impacted by a project.
Yeah.
And this person that we're interviewing, say, for example, that they were in a refugee camp or they were arrested, there were horrible things that happened in the course of that, and they were interrogated. And when they were interrogated, it was in this dingy small room with no windows, with a giant lamp on top of their heads. Now, fast forward to many, many years later, they're now in a workplace and it's great, they're safe, everything feels good. But their office looks exactly, feels exactly like that space that they were interrogated in. No matter what we do, this person is going to have a significant challenge in being engaged, in being present, in being productive, and so on. So if we take the time to understand why, that helps us understand that, oh, there's something associated with the physical setting that is preventing this individual from coming at it
Mm.
in a good way. So little things like that can go a really long way for us to build better workplaces and build better relationships.
100%. And I think, um, that working with a lot of female founders, that's what I find is that, they've left workplaces that
Mhm,
are quite toxic, are very dismissive,
mhm,
are and not that we're all not goal focused, not that we all are not all striving, but not to the exclusion of the humanity, the
yeah,
people that create all the value in our organizations. And so, I mean, a lot of women leave the corporate world because there is no space for that. And so they
mhm,
want to create workplace cultures that include these pieces because they know what it feels like to not have.
mhm.
That makes sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I hear that all the
Yeah.
time. And in a lot of ways, when I started narratives, I've said this before, narratives and Alkahani, the idea was always to focus on the little things. It comes from my grandfather, my dada Jan, he would always say, "Choti choti khushiyan," little joys. And, using little things to make big impact.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's those little things that matter the most. So whether that's making sure that you have a wellness room that's soundproof so mamas can pump milk without feeling self-conscious about it, or a hybrid workplace that is truly so hybrid that all you need to do to let people know where you are is a 3-letter thing in a Slack channel to say I'm working from home today,
Oh,
or having the option to bring your kids into the workplace anytime you want. So a lot of those little things can go a long way to build a workplace that is inclusive. And again, also we want to be mindful that inclusion inclusion is easier said than done.
yeah.
We're never as leaders going to satisfy everybody, and human needs evolve. It takes time to understand those needs. It takes time to respond to those needs. And sometimes they're just not respondable given the circumstances that we're
Yes.
in. So
Yes.
as leaders, we're also always trying to manage that dimension. But you're absolutely right. People leave workplaces where they're not seen, they're not heard, and where things are toxic.
Yeah. I think for a lot of my clients and a lot of guests on the show, there has been some kind of moment where
Mhm,
they've chosen to leave. And a lot of those moments have to do with the workplace, the culture, and the leadership.
mhm,
And they make a very personal decision to exit the corporate world and start their own practice. And I think it's unfortunate that we still continue to see that organizations have a long way to go. But you're right, it isn't always easy.
mhm.
It isn't always easy.
Yeah,
Um,
and with that also comes we as women, I come from a strong line of very kick-ass women and aunties, and
yeah,
you don't mess with them. And we grew up with that strong sense of nobody takes our rights away from us, nobody takes
no,
things away from us. Like we so there's a very strong emphasis on reclaiming agency. I have for most of my career been the only brown person in the room, the only woman in the room, the youngest one in the room, and so on, and um, have been aware of that, have been uncomfortable about that, but have also known that that's my reality and this is my space, and I'm gonna sit in this chair because this is my space, and
yeah,
nobody gets to take that away from me. So even the leaving the corporate world to start your own thing, that's awesome because you're reclaiming your power by
yeah,
doing. So too bad, corporate world, like that's your loss.
yeah, totally.
So yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've been steadily growing narratives, and so I want to ask you, how do you create that space in your organization for the connection, the conversation, the curiosity? What do you do as a leader?
I it's many things that I definitely don't do it alone. I have an amazing team. We've over the years brought together people who are compassionate, people who are kind, people
Yeah,
who know how to be good allies,
yeah,
um, and people who get it. Um, whether that's, how to take care of each other, whether that's, having a good space, good mental space, to be able to do the work. There's a lot of nuances in the work that we do where you need the right people to be in this space. Not people who have any sort of savior complex that never flies. We're not here to do social service. We're here to be in the background. So it requires a special kind of person to be in this space. People who are resilient, people who know what self-care means, because you have to be able to do this work in over a long period of time. So over the years, we've been very fortunate that we've brought together people who get it.
Yeah.
And it's what the group has done together. There's lots of collaborative decision making at all levels in the organization. Does not mean that it's a flat organization. There's absolutely a hierarchy in the organization, but it is collaborative. It is feedback focused. We pay close attention to the pulse of team morale, how it's evolving, what the needs are. I remember this was year 3 or maybe even year 4 of year 7, so not that long ago, that one of our first employees, we found out that she was pregnant, and this was our first time navigating that. And we said, okay, what do we need to do? We need maternity leave. We also need paternity leave because dads should be just as involved.
Yes.
We need a wellness room. We need a welcome back bonus because that's important. And we need to be able to support new parents with a childcare stipend. So we figured these things out in response to just having received the news that one of our teammates gonna have a baby. So, and that's just one of, gosh, like 100 examples of, oh, now this is happening. How do we make sure that this is going to work for the team? So it's been very intentional. It's been responsive, and it also has been proactive in a lot of ways. We're doing things that most organizations are not.
100%. I mean, I think that, that's incredibly thoughtful. And you've used the word intentional, but incredibly thoughtful and intentional to support your new mom before, before she even had the baby. And I think that's absolutely remarkable. I had a client, she just had her baby a week or so ago. And in her organization, as a juxtaposition, which is, she works in an industry that's incredibly male dominated, like literally only 4 or 5 women in the office. They actually didn't know if they had a maternity leave policy. And she had to go and talk to one of the other women about, how does this work here? Nobody knew. It wasn't even that they were intentionally, they were kind of unconsciously incompetent, to use that phrase. They hadn't put a lot of thought into it at all because they don't have babies. So it wasn't that they were being rude or mean or ignorant. They just quite sincerely hadn't given it a whole lot of thought.
And that's so funny. And I guess the test is in whether they did something about it after.
I don't know that they did a whole lot. Like it was a bit of a hot potato. Nobody seemed to know, and nobody really wanted to step outside of their box to do anything about it. I mean, she got it sorted out, but I had to shake my head. Like what kind of an organization in the 21st century hasn't actually thought about women go and have babies and then they'd like to come back to the office? It was quite something else. And she's, she was very driven, organized woman. So she basically built it herself and then executed. But I love I love the intention of, we're just going to take care of her. We're just going to take care of each other. Like that's what's at the heart of it.
Yeah. And when we do that as leaders, it sets precedents for future leaders. The rate at which people grow within an organization that is progressive that way is quite high. So if I'm supporting a new parent today, they're going to be the ones in that decision-making seat 3 years from now, So if they've been supported, they will support and probably add their own touch, their own flavor, their own like improvement to it. So we got to do our part so that future leaders do theirs and be proactive about it as opposed to just reacting to it.
Yeah, totally. I love that. That's a beautiful story. I want to ask you about, I mean, a lot of your work at Narrative centers around the planning and the strategy and the execution of those pieces. It's beautiful work. And you really weave a lot of storytelling through that, from what I can gather. And I think there's so much value in the story. Tell us a little bit more about how you do that.
Yeah. Okay, so I am obsessed with stories. I love stories. We learned growing up, we learned through stories. We would spend lots of time with my grandparents just sitting around and listening to all sorts of stories of, so and so did this. So one little example would be if one of us were approaching the stove and someone wanted to tell us not to, it wouldn't just be, don't touch the stove. It would be as urgent, but it would be like, did I tell you that time? And we would all like instantly get redirected. And as we're listening, it would be this like long, elaborate, beautifully meandering story about so and so who touched the stove, they lost their hand, and da, 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 da. So it was just like this fascinating approach to caretaking. And it came from, our aunties and uncles and grandparents, everybody, huge collective responsibility of parenting as opposed to just, mom and dad. So everything was through story. Food was through story. So my grandma, my nano, would, instead of teaching a recipe, she would teach how each of the spices had a personality. And then that personality was related to a story about how they acquired that personality, which would then tie to how this spice plays in your mouth to the impact it would have when you drop it in the pot. So like, holy, beautiful way to learn. And I hold those stories so sacred. So I love stories. So bringing that to how we've incorporated that into the work of narratives and now into the work of kahani. Kahani, by the way, means story in 3 languages, no surprise. But we, instead of, so in a lot of the work that we do, it would be considered qualitative research. So you would go out, you would have a structured questionnaire, an interview guideline, and you would ask certain questions.
Right.
Instead of just doing that, we spend time just with people listening to their stories. And eventually what that does is we develop a deeper understanding of what is important to them instead of asking the question, what is important to you?
Yes.
We just spend the time listening, and what is important to them emerges in that natural way if they're feeling safe and comfortable and in a good space and we've got a relationship. So story work is such a powerful tool for relational learning from each other. And yeah, like, so that would be one example. Another example would be through this concept of like, if we're trying to do memory jogging, we'll have pulled certain photos from the archives to see if people can remember something about a certain time, like similar to what we do with keepsakes. Every time a keepsake comes out, the stories just get unlocked, right?
Totally.
So that's how we.
Yeah, I have a friend that does legacy books for families.
Ooh.
Digging out all those family photos. And you're right. The stories are just, they're buried right there in the photo.
So
So
rich.
so beautiful. I totally get it.
And
Yeah.
stories build compassion. So, when we think about how story work applies to peace building,
Yeah.
if we can bring people together who are from different backgrounds around food. So everybody has something deep fried in their culture, deep fried with a filling. And imagine that deep fried deliciousness with a filling sitting in the middle of the table. and
Yeah.
you have people, 8 people from different cultural backgrounds, and you ask them, do you have something that's deep fried? How do you make it? Where did you learn how to make it? How do you adjust it? Boom, like 8 different beautiful stories. It builds compassion, there's humor, there's laughter. So
Yeah.
stories are powerful.
I love, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Every culture has something deep fried with a
Right?
with a juicy filling. I love it. And stories are very powerful. We were talking before we hit record about sort of the power. I certainly learned this by learning about indigenous cultures, and that's really how they bring their culture to life is through story. They
Mhm.
existed prior to there being written words, and that's how they pass along all of the collective knowledge through generations. And I think story is really powerful even in our modern colonial organizations,
Mhm.
in our small business, the story of how we came to be female founders. That's why I do this podcast.
Yeah,
Stories are powerful and impactful and deeply personal, but also oddly, broadly relatable.
absolutely.
The story is the message,
Oh,
right?
well said. Well said.
I think they're deeply impactful in our corporate cultures. Like, culture is how we get work done together and how we talk about how we do that work. That's the
Absolutely.
story.
It's hard to explain concepts. It's easy to tell a story.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it makes things accessible. It makes us accessible to each other. And it
Yes.
really breaks down barriers of between, academia and practice, for example,
Yeah.
or someone who's considered a technical expert versus someone with lived experience. Like story is such a powerful way to bridge across in conversation.
I was working with an organization the other day and they're struggling with, customer service
Hmm.
versus sort of that backline production
Hmm.
versus the technical product development, right? Like there's 3 or 4 different groups in their organization that always seem to be at odds.
Hmm.
And they're trying to understand where that comes in. We always hear this break down the silos. That's a very corporate, we're very siloed. We need to get out of our silos. Story is the most impactful way to just dissolve the silos.
Mhm.
Because people they can see themselves in the story, they can see their grandmother in the story, they can relate on another new level, right? They can
Absolutely.
connect. Yeah.
And imagine if, like thinking of this organization, I love that example that you gave, Lindsay, like thinking of all these silos. I'm very anti-silo. Like
Yeah.
any time that any idea emerges where it suggests a silo, I just like boom, shut
Yeah.
down. Like, no, we're not going to do that. Um, but bringing it to this idea of breaking out silos, like imagine if you put everybody, imagine if you had a whiteboard and had each of the groups,
Yeah.
as they are, and then you pulled people from those silos to just ask them why this work is important to them
Yeah.
and start seeing how those things actually connect to each other. The silos are going to be completely irrelevant. So there's such powerful stories are such a powerful tool in understanding our collective why within organizations, in understanding our journey, and that's just, yeah, it's so neat.
It really is. And I think about, the female-led organizations that I work with. I mean, we're talking very small teams, but it
Mhm.
is it's awfully easy to get siloed, right? Like even in these smaller groups. But the idea that we get to share and learn and experience through some of those stories, especially when we're sharing the stories of our customers, when we're
Mhm.
sharing the stories of our triumphs, when we're sharing the stories of our failures, and then talking about what was the opportunity, what did we learn, how do we get, I mean,
Mhm.
when we're bringing new people into the organize, there's no faster way to bring someone into your culture and get them up to speed than to tell them some of these collective.
Oh, love it. Yes, absolutely. 100%. 100%.
Oh my gosh, I knew this conversation today was going to be super neat. It's been better than I ever imagined. I'm like all tingly all over.
Me
I could
too.
I could seriously talk about this stuff like all day, every day.
Amazing.
So thank you so much for this really beautiful, profound conversation. I am so glad that we got to have you as a guest on the show. How does everybody connect with you? Where do they find you?
The best way to connect would be LinkedIn. Um, Send me a message. We can connect from there. We can grab a coffee virtually or in person if you're close. I'm working on building my own website because there's a book in the works.
Ooh,
So people can reach out to me on LinkedIn and then we can go from there.
love it. We may have to have you back and have another one of these beautiful conversations around that book.
Would love to. Would love to.
Awesome. And we'll make sure that all of those links are in the show notes. So please check that out. If you love this conversation today as much as I did, because I'm totally nerding out, please leave us a review. We love that. That's very helpful. And also share it with a couple friends. We really want to enhance this conversation, not just around story, but around culture and connection and demystifying conflict, like all these beautiful topics today. So please go and do that for me. Leave a review and share. That would be beautiful. And thank you again so much for being here today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Lindsay.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Female Founder Unplugged podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening as much as I did hosting this conversation. I feel so lucky that I get to connect with such amazing female entrepreneurs. And if you enjoyed today's session, would you do me a big favor? Would you hit subscribe and give this episode a 5-star review? I'd also love it if you would share with your friends. We've got a goal here at the Female Founder Unplugged podcast to impact 1,000 female founders. And with your help, we can really amplify the message. Thanks again for being a part of the show. And don't forget to connect with me at highvoltageleadership.ca. We'll see you next week.